It was just another Thursday at the office, the kind of day where the fluorescent lights seemed to buzz a little louder and the clock on the wall moved a little slower. I work at a mid-sized marketing firm in downtown Seattle, where the open floor plan means we all exist in this strange bubble of forced proximity and carefully maintained professional boundaries. Our office has the standard setup: rows of desks with minimal partitions, meeting rooms with glass walls, and a kitchen area that always smells faintly of someone's leftover lunch. It's in this unremarkable setting that I've come to know my coworkers, including James. James sits at the desk across from mine. He's been with the company for about 3 years, just a few months longer than I have. He's what most people would describe as conventionally attractive, tall with dark hair that always falls just right, even when he runs his fingers through it in frustration during deadline crunches. He has this habit of chewing on pen caps when he's concentrating, and he always brings coffee for the team on Monday mornings. These are the little details you notice about someone when you spend 40 hours a week in their vicinity. Oh, and James is straight. Not that it matters in a professional setting, but it's a fact that I've been acutely aware of since I first felt that little flutter in my chest when he laughed at one of my jokes during a team meeting. I should mention that I'm gay, and I've been out at work since my first day. It's never been an issue with anyone, including James. We've developed the kind of comfortable friendship that exists primarily within the confines of our office building, occasional lunch breaks together, commiserating over difficult clients, and the kind of casual banter that makes the workday more bearable. We've never really spent time together outside of work events, which is why what happened last Thursday was so unexpected. Now, in Seattle, umbrellas are more than just accessories. They're essential survival tools for most of the year. The constant drizzle becomes such a normal part of life that most locals develop an almost supernatural sense for when they'll need rain protection. I always keep a sturdy black umbrella in my desk drawer, a habit my mother instilled in me growing up in this perpetually damp city. "Never trust a clear morning in Seattle," she'd say, and she was usually right. Let me explain why this matters. An umbrella might seem like a mundane object, but in the right circumstances, it becomes something more significant. It creates a small, intimate space in the midst of chaos, a portable shelter for two people to share. There's something inherently vulnerable about sharing that space with someone else, huddled together against the elements. It requires a certain level of comfort with physical proximity, a willingness to synchronize your steps with another person. In a way, an umbrella becomes a temporary home for a connection between two people. That Thursday morning started clear and bright. One of those deceptive spring days that lures you into believing summer has arrived early. By lunchtime, dark clouds had rolled in from the sound, and by 3 o'clock, rain was pounding against the windows with the kind of intensity that makes you grateful to be indoors. I watched as people in the building across the street scurried for cover, newspapers and jackets held ineffectively over their heads. The office began to empty earlier than usual as people rushed to beat the worst of the downpour. I was packing up my laptop when I noticed James staring out the window with a look of resignation on his face. "Everything okay?" I asked, sliding my laptop into my messenger bag. He turned to me with a slight grimace. "I didn't check the forecast this morning. No umbrella, no raincoat, and I've got a 20-minute walk to the light rail station." He gestured to his outfit, a light blue button-down shirt that would definitely show every raindrop and khaki pants that would be soaked through in minutes. "That's rough," I said, feeling a twinge of sympathy. I pulled open my desk drawer and reached for my umbrella, hesitating for just a moment before the words tumbled out of my mouth. "We could share mine if you want. I'm headed to the station too." The offer hung in the air between us for a moment. I immediately wondered if I'd crossed some invisible line. Was this weird? Would he think I was hitting on him? Before my thoughts could spiral further, James's face brightened with relief. "Are you sure? That would be amazing. I promise not to hog it," he said with a laugh that eased the momentary tension. "No problem," I replied, trying to sound casual while my heart did a little skip. That's what work friends are for, right? As we rode the elevator down to the lobby, we chatted about the project we'd been working on all week. It was the comfortable conversation of colleagues, nothing out of the ordinary. But as we approached the revolving doors that led outside, I became increasingly aware that we were about to enter a different kind of space together, one defined by the circumference of my umbrella. The rain was coming down in sheets when we stepped outside. I unfurled my umbrella, the sound of it opening nearly drowned out by the drumming of raindrops on the sidewalk. James stepped closer to me, our shoulders almost touching as we both tried to fit under the canopy. "I think we're going to have to get a little cozier if we both want to stay dry," he said with a practical tone that somehow made the situation less awkward. He was right. My umbrella was decent-sized, but not quite built for two grown men to maintain a professional distance. "Yeah, you're right," I agreed, and we shifted closer together. Our arms pressed against each other, and I could smell his cologne, something woody with hints of citrus. It was strange how this simple physical proximity made me notice details I'd never picked up on in our years of working together. We set off toward the station, immediately falling into the awkward rhythm of two people trying to walk in sync. Our first few steps were a comedy of errors. He stepped left when I stepped right. Our feet tangled briefly, and we both laughed as we nearly lost the protection of the umbrella. "This is harder than it looks," James commented as we finally found our stride. "My mom and I used to share an umbrella when she'd walk me to school, but I was a lot shorter then." "It's definitely a skill," I replied. "My ex and I got pretty good at it, but it took practice." I mentioned my ex so casually, a subtle reminder of my sexuality that felt important to acknowledge in this moment of unexpected intimacy. James didn't miss a beat. "Well, I promise to be a quick study. Can't have you showing up at the station looking like you fell in a puddle because of my poor umbrella sharing technique." As we walked, the initial awkwardness began to fade. The rain created a strange bubble around us. The sound of it hitting the umbrella overhead and the splash of our shoes on the wet pavement formed a kind of white noise that made our conversation feel more private, more personal than it ever had in the office. We talked about things we'd never discussed before: his passion for rock climbing, my love of vintage record stores, the trips we hope to take someday. There's something about walking side by side rather than sitting face to face that makes certain conversations easier. You can speak more freely when you're not watching for the other person's immediate reaction. About halfway to the station, we passed a coffee shop where the windows were fogged with condensation, the warm yellow light inside looking particularly inviting against the gray backdrop of the rainy street. "I'm tempted to suggest we duck in there for a coffee until this lets up," James said, nodding toward the shop. "But I know you probably want to get home." I hesitated. Was he actually suggesting we extend our time together? Or was he just being polite? "I'm in no rush," I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral. "If you want to wait out the rain a bit, I'm game." He seemed to consider it for a moment, then shook his head. "Nah, let's keep going. I'm actually enjoying our walk, believe it or not." Something about the way he said it made my chest feel warm despite the chilly rain. We continued on, our bodies falling into a more natural rhythm now. When a car sped by, sending a wave of water toward the sidewalk, James instinctively pulled me away from the curb, his hand briefly gripping my arm. It was a small gesture, the kind of protective reflex you might have for anyone, but it lingered in my mind. "Thanks for the save," I said, trying not to read too much into the moment. Getting soaked by puddle water would have really completed this Seattle experience. "Just doing my part as your umbrella buddy," he replied with a grin. "Speaking of which, I feel like I should be the one holding this thing since I'm taller." He gestured to the umbrella, which I'd been carefully trying to hold high enough to accommodate his height. "Be my guest," I said, handing it over. Our fingers brushed in the exchange, and I noticed James didn't pull away with the kind of quick recoil that sometimes happens in these moments of accidental touch between straight and gay men. With James holding the umbrella, our walking dynamic shifted slightly. He naturally took the position on the outside, closer to the street, and I found myself tucked a bit more under his arm. It was the kind of protective positioning that friends do without thinking, but it felt significant somehow. As we approached the final stretch to the station, the rain began to ease slightly. The timing seemed almost orchestrated, as if the weather had conspired to create exactly the right conditions for this unexpected shared journey. "Looks like it might be clearing up," James observed, looking at the sky where patches of lighter gray were beginning to show through the darker clouds. "Just in time for us to reach the station," I replied, feeling a strange mix of relief and disappointment. Part of me had been enjoying this unexpected intimacy, this glimpse of what it might be like to have a different kind of relationship with James. When we reached the covered area of the station, James closed the umbrella and shook it out before handing it back to me. Our hands touched again, and this time I thought I detected a slight hesitation, as if he was prolonging the contact. "Thanks for saving me from a complete soaking," he said, running a hand through his hair, which was slightly damp at the edges despite our best efforts with the umbrella. "I owe you one. Don't worry about it," I assured him. "That's what friends are for, right?" There was a moment of silence between us, filled with the ambient sounds of the station, the automated announcements, the shuffling of commuters, the distant rumble of an approaching train. "My train's the next one," James said, checking the electronic schedule board. "What about you?" "I'm 2 stops after yours," I replied. We stood there for another moment, and I couldn't help but feel there was something unspoken hanging in the air between us. "Well," James finally said, "I guess I'll see you tomorrow at work." "Yeah, see you tomorrow," I echoed, trying not to sound disappointed that our shared adventure was coming to such an ordinary conclusion. But then James surprised me. "Maybe we could grab lunch tomorrow? There's that new place around the corner from the office I've been wanting to try." It was a simple invitation, the kind that colleagues extend to each other all the time. But something about the context, coming after this unexpected shared intimacy, made it feel like more than just a casual lunch suggestion. "Sure," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "That sounds great." James's train arrived then, and with a quick wave, he was gone, disappearing into the crowd of commuters. I stood there for a moment, my damp umbrella dripping onto the platform, trying to process what had just happened. On the surface, nothing extraordinary had occurred. 2 coworkers had shared an umbrella in the rain and walked to the train station together. It happens every day in cities around the world. But beneath that simple narrative, I felt like something had shifted between us, some new understanding or possibility had opened up. As I rode home on my own train, watching the rain-slicked city pass by outside the window, I found myself replaying moments from our walk. The way James had moved closer to me under the umbrella without hesitation. The easy flow of our conversation. The protective way he'd positioned himself between me and the street. None of these things necessarily meant anything beyond basic human kindness and friendship, but they had awakened something in me that I'd been trying to ignore. I've always been careful about developing feelings for straight friends. It's a path that usually leads to disappointment and awkwardness. But there was something about this shared moment with James that felt different from the typical straight guy/gay guy friendship dynamic I was used to. There had been a comfort in our physical proximity that suggested, at the very least, that James was secure enough in his own sexuality not to worry about what sharing an umbrella with his gay coworker might look like to others. When I got home to my apartment, I hung the umbrella in my shower to dry and found myself smiling at it, as if it had become a talisman of some sort. I knew I was probably reading too much into the whole situation, letting my imagination run away with me. James was straight. He had mentioned ex-girlfriends in previous conversations. There was no reason to think that our umbrella adventure had meant anything more to him than a convenient way to stay dry. And yet, I couldn't help but wonder if something had changed. Not in terms of his sexuality. I wasn't harboring fantasies about turning a straight guy or anything like that. But maybe in terms of our friendship, our connection. Perhaps sharing that small, intimate space created by my umbrella had allowed us to see each other more clearly as people rather than just colleagues. The next morning, I arrived at work with a mix of anticipation and nervousness. Would things be awkward between us? Would James act differently? Had I built up the significance of our shared walk in my mind? When I reached my desk, I found a takeout coffee cup waiting for me. James was already at his desk, typing away at his computer. He looked up as I approached and smiled. "Morning," he said casually. "Got you coffee. Figured I owed you for the umbrella rescue." "You didn't have to do that," I replied, but I was touched by the gesture. "I know," he said with a shrug. "But I wanted to." "Still on for lunch?" "Absolutely," I confirmed, and we both turned to our work, falling back into our normal office routine. But as I sipped the coffee, which, I noticed, was exactly how I liked it, I couldn't help but feel that something fundamental had shifted between us. It wasn't dramatic or earth-shattering. It was subtle, like the almost imperceptible change in air pressure before a weather front moves in. I don't know what will come of this new dimension to our relationship. Maybe nothing. Maybe we'll become closer friends. Maybe, in some alternate universe where things work out differently than they usually do, something more. But what I do know is that I'll never look at my umbrella the same way again. It's no longer just a practical tool for keeping dry in Seattle's persistent rain. It's become a symbol of connection, of the unexpected intimacy that can develop in the small, shared spaces we create with others. And if the weather forecast calls for rain again soon, well, I might just happen to mention to James that my umbrella is always available to share. Total_char_count, 18,742.